Welcome. Before we begin this journey through some of the most peculiar legislation ever committed to law books, I want you to do something for me. Take a moment and leave a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Are you winding down after a long day? Is it 3 in the morning and you can't sleep? Midday perhaps? Wherever you are, whatever time shows on your clock, let that go now. Forget about time for the next little while. Let these strange facts wash over you. There's no rush, no deadline, nowhere else you need to be. Just relax, settle in, and prepare yourself for a glimpse into the absurd corners of human governance. What you're about to hear might seem impossible. Laws that defy logic, regulations that make you question how they ever came to exist, rules that have somehow survived decades or even centuries, despite making absolutely no sense in the modern world. And yet, every single one of them is real. Every one of them is still technically enforceable. Some are merely forgotten relics gathering dust in legal archives. Others are actively enforced to this day. The line between the reasonable and the ridiculous in human legislation is far thinner than you might imagine. Number 1 in France, it is illegal to name a pig Napoleon. The French have always taken their history seriously, perhaps too seriously. Somewhere in the French legal code exists a provision that forbids citizens from naming a pig Napoleon. The law dates back to the 19th century, a time when the memory of Napoleon Bonaparte still burned bright in the national consciousness. The reasoning seems straightforward enough at first glance. Napoleon remains one of France's most celebrated figures, a military genius who reshaped Europe and left an indelible mark on French identity. To name a pig after him would constitute an insult to national dignity. But dig a little deeper and the law becomes fascinating for what it reveals about the nature of respect, memory, and the lengths to which governments will go to protect the reputation of historical figures. No records exist of anyone being prosecuted under this law in recent history, yet it remains on the books, a silent guardian of Napoleonic honor. One has to wonder about the circumstances that led to its creation. Was there an epidemic of pig-naming mockery in 19th century France? Did someone actually name their swine after the emperor, causing such offense that Parliament felt compelled to act? The answers are lost to time, but the law endures. Number 2. In Switzerland, it is illegal to flush the toilet after 10 p.m. in an apartment building. The Swiss are known for their precision, their punctuality, and their almost obsessive attention to order and quiet. This particular law takes that reputation to its logical, if absurd, extreme. In many Swiss apartment buildings, flushing the toilet after 10 o'clock at night is technically against the law. The rationale centers on noise pollution and the Swiss cultural value of Ruhe, or quiet time. After 10, residents are expected to maintain silence out of respect for their neighbors. The law assumes that the sound of a flushing toilet constitutes a disturbance significant enough to warrant legal prohibition. Think about that for a moment. The everyday, unavoidable act of using the bathroom becomes a potential criminal offense simply because of the time displayed on the clock. Enforcement varies widely. Some buildings take it seriously, with landlords including specific clauses in rental agreements. Others treat it as a quaint suggestion rather than a rule. But the existence of the law itself speaks to a particular mindset about communal living and personal responsibility. It raises questions about where individual freedom ends and collective consideration begins. At what point does maintaining peace and quiet cross the line into absurd micromanagement of daily life? Number 3, in Singapore, chewing gum is illegal. Singapore's ban on chewing gum has achieved a certain notoriety worldwide, often cited as an example of the city-state's strict approach to law and order. What many people don't realize is just how comprehensive this prohibition actually is. The law, enacted in 1992, doesn't simply discourage gum chewing. It makes the import and sale of chewing gum illegal. Possession of gum for the purposes of trading can result in significant fines and even jail time. The reasoning behind the ban was eminently practical from the government's perspective. Discarded chewing gum was causing problems for the new mass rapid transit system, Singapore's subway network. Gum stuck to train doors caused delays. Gum on floors created cleaning nightmares. Rather than launch education campaigns or increase cleaning efforts, the government simply eliminated the problem at its source by banning the product entirely. The approach is quintessentially Singaporean, reflecting a philosophy that sometimes draconian measures are justified if they serve the greater good of social order and efficiency. In 2004, the law was slightly relaxed following pressure from the United States during free trade negotiations. Now, therapeutic gum, the kind prescribed by doctors and dentists, can be purchased from pharmacies. But you need to provide identification when buying it, and pharmacists must record your details. Even this small concession comes wrapped in surveillance and documentation. The gum ban remains one of Singapore's most famous quirks, a symbol of how far a government is willing to go to maintain what it considers a clean and orderly society. Number 4, in Britain, it is illegal to handle a salmon. In suspicious circumstances, the Salmon Act of 1986 contains a provision that has baffled and amused people for decades. Section 32 of the Act makes it an offense to handle salmon in suspicious circumstances. The law doesn't clearly define what constitutes suspicious circumstances, leaving that determination to the discretion of law enforcement and the courts. This vagueness is precisely what makes the law so strange and so interesting. The provision was intended to combat salmon poaching, a serious problem in Scottish rivers where salmon fishing represents both cultural heritage and economic value. Poachers would catch salmon illegally and then sell them, often through legitimate-looking channels. The law was meant to give authorities the power to prosecute people who were clearly engaged in illegal salmon trade, but for whom direct evidence of poaching was difficult to obtain. If you're found with a large quantity of salmon and can't provide a satisfactory explanation for how you came to possess it, you've handled salmon in suspicious circumstances. But the wording is so beautifully absurd that it has transcended its practical origins to become a beloved example of legal oddity. What makes salmon handling suspicious? Is there a way to hold a fish that looks more criminal than another way? Does the fish itself appear suspicious? Or is it the handler's demeanor that raises red flags? The law trusts that people will know suspicious when they see it, but offers no guidance. It's a perfect example of legal drafting that prioritizes practical enforcement over precise language, with unintentionally comedic results. Number 5, in Denmark, you must check under your car for sleeping children before starting it. Danish law requires drivers to inspect underneath their vehicles before starting the engine to ensure no children are sleeping there. The mental image this law conjures is almost comical. Who are these children seeking shelter under parked cars? Under what circumstances would a child choose the undercarriage of a vehicle as a sleeping location? The law seems to imagine a Denmark overrun with vagrant children using automobiles as makeshift beds. The reality is both less dramatic and more sobering than the law suggests. The provision dates back to an era when street children were more common, when poverty was more visible, and when the dangers of industrialization were still being understood and legislated against. Children did sometimes seek shelter in and around vehicles, especially in winter. The law was born from tragedy, from accidents that could have been prevented with a moment of caution. Today, Denmark has robust social services, and street children are exceptionally rare. The scenario the law was designed to prevent essentially no longer exists, yet the law remains a fossil from a different time, still technically requiring every Danish driver to get down on their hands and knees and peer under their car before turning the key. Most people are completely unaware of this legal obligation. Those who know about it treat it as a historical curiosity rather than a genuine requirement. But there it sits in the legal code, a reminder that laws often outlive the problems they were created to solve. Number 6, in Thailand, it is illegal to step on money. Thai law prohibits stepping on currency, and this is one law that gets enforced with some regularity, particularly when foreigners violate it. The prohibition stems from the fact that Thai banknotes and coins bear the image of the king. The monarchy in Thailand is revered with an intensity that can be difficult for outsiders to fully grasp. The king is not merely a political figure or even just a beloved national symbol. He is considered semi-divine, an object of profound veneration. To step on money is therefore to step on the king's image, an act of profound disrespect and insult. The law protects royal dignity by extension through the currency. This might seem like mere symbolism, but in Thailand, such symbolism carries real weight and real consequences. People have been arrested, prosecuted, and imprisoned for acts deemed disrespectful to the monarchy. The legal framework around royal insult, known as lèse majesté, is broad and strictly enforced. For visitors to Thailand, this law presents a genuine hazard. A banknote might fall to the ground in a crowded market. The instinctive reaction might be to step on it to prevent it from blowing away, to secure it while you bend down to pick it up. That innocent gesture could result in arrest. The law requires that money on the ground be picked up carefully, never pinned with a foot. It's a small detail, easily overlooked, but one that carries potentially serious consequences. The law serves as a constant reminder of the special status the monarchy occupies in Thai society, a status that permeates even the most mundane aspects of daily life. Number 7, in Oklahoma, it is illegal to make ugly faces at dogs. Oklahoma statute prohibits making faces intended to alarm, annoy, or otherwise disturb a dog. The law is part of a broader set of animal welfare provisions, but this particular clause stands out for its sheer absurdity. How does one legally define an ugly face? At what point does a facial expression cross from neutral or amusing into illegal territory? And how exactly does one determine whether a dog has been alarmed or annoyed? The law presumably originated from concerns about animal harassment, about people who might torment animals for entertainment. But the specific prohibition on making faces seems oddly specific and simultaneously impossibly vague. Dogs respond to human facial expressions. This much is scientifically established. They can distinguish between happy and angry faces. But the idea that lawmakers felt the need to criminalize this specific form of interaction suggests either a rash of face-based dog harassment or legislative overreach of spectacular proportions. Enforcement would be nearly impossible. What evidence would be presented in court? Testimony from the dog owner that their pet seemed upset? The defendant arguing their face wasn't ugly, merely expressive? The entire concept collapses under scrutiny, yet there it remains in Oklahoma law. It serves as a reminder that laws are written by humans, often in response to specific incidents or moral panics, and those laws frequently outlive their usefulness or reasonability. The ugly face law has almost certainly never been enforced, but it continues to provide amusement to anyone who discovers it buried in Oklahoma's legal code. Number 8, in Greece, electronic games are banned in public places. In 2002, Greece passed a law intended to crack down on illegal gambling. The law banned electronic games from public places with the goal of shutting down illegal gambling parlors that were becoming increasingly prevalent. The problem was the law's incredibly broad language. It didn't just ban gambling machines, it banned all electronic games. The sweeping nature of the prohibition meant that, technically, playing anything from a Game Boy to a laptop in a public space could constitute a criminal violation. The law created immediate chaos. Internet cafes were raided, gaming tournaments were shut down. Even tourists playing games on personal devices potentially faced legal trouble. The law failed to distinguish between games of chance and games of skill, between commercial gambling operations and private entertainment. It was legislative overreach on a massive scale, using a sledgehammer to swat a fly. International pressure, particularly from the European Union, forced Greece to revise the law. But for a period, Greece had effectively criminalized gaming culture in one of the most draconian moves any democratic nation had attempted. The incident revealed how quickly well-intentioned legislation can spiral into absurdity when the language is insufficiently precise. It also demonstrated the disconnect that can exist between lawmakers and the modern world they're attempting to regulate. The original law assumed that electronic games existed primarily in the context of gambling, failing to recognize that gaming had become a ubiquitous form of entertainment divorced from wagering. Number 9. In Canada, it is illegal to pay for items over 25 cents, with only pennies. The Currency Act of Canada places limits on how many coins can be used to pay for a single transaction. For pennies, the limit is 25 cents. Try to pay for something more expensive using only pennies, and the vendor is legally permitted to refuse your payment. The law exists to prevent people from weaponizing small change, from using mountains of pennies as a form of protest or harassment. The provision recognizes that while currency must be accepted as legal tender, there are practical limits to how that acceptance should function. A business shouldn't be forced to halt operations while counting out thousands of pennies because a disgruntled customer wants to make a point. The law balances the principle of legal tender against the reality of commerce and the potential for abuse. Interestingly, Canada discontinued the penny in 2013, effectively making this particular provision obsolete for new transactions. But the law remains on the books, applicable to the pennies still in circulation, a testament to how quickly the real world can overtake legislation. The penny law is actually part of a broader set of limits in the Currency Act. You can't use more than 25 loonies, 100 dimes, or $40 in nickels for a single transaction either. Each denomination has its threshold, a carefully considered limit on the inconvenience a payer can legally inflict on a payee. Number 10. In Venice, it is illegal to feed pigeons. Venice has been waging war on its pigeon population for decades. The birds, once considered a charming part of the Venetian experience, have become a genuine threat to the city's architectural heritage. Pigeon droppings are acidic. Over time, they corrode stone, damage frescoes, and eat away at the irreplaceable buildings that make Venice unique. The city decided the pigeons had to go, or at least their numbers had to be dramatically reduced. Feeding pigeons was made illegal, with fines reaching up to €600 for violations. The law targets both residents and tourists, though enforcement focuses primarily on visitors who might be unaware of the prohibition. Iconic images of St. Mark's Square often showed tourists surrounded by clouds of pigeons tossing breadcrumbs and seed. Those days are over. The square is now regularly patrolled, and feeding pigeons will result in an immediate fine. The law represents a city prioritizing preservation over sentimentality. The pigeons may be living creatures, but the buildings are irreplaceable artifacts of human achievement spanning centuries. When forced to choose between the two, Venice chose its architectural legacy. The decision wasn't without controversy. Animal rights advocates objected. Some tourists felt the ban was part of Venice losing its charm and becoming overly sanitized. But the deterioration was real, the threat measurable. The pigeon feeding ban is enforced seriously and has contributed to a noticeable reduction in the bird population. Venice made a choice about what it wants to be, and that choice didn't include being a sanctuary for pigeons at the expense of its buildings. Number 11. In Japan, dancing in clubs after midnight was illegal until 2015. For decades, Japanese law prohibited dancing in clubs after midnight unless the establishment held a special and difficult-to-obtain license. The law, dating from 1948, was originally intended to regulate activities associated with vice and maintain public morals in the post-war period. Dance halls were associated with behavior authorities wanted to control, and the law was meant to give them power over nightlife venues. The law became increasingly absurd as dance culture became mainstream. Nightclubs were technically illegal if they allowed dancing after midnight without proper licensing. Many clubs operated in legal gray areas, either obtaining hard-to-get licenses or ignoring the law and hoping for selective enforcement. Police could raid clubs and arrest patrons for dancing, and occasionally did, particularly targeting certain establishments while ignoring others. The dancing ban became an international embarrassment for Japan, a symbol of outdated moralizing that contradicted the country's image as a modern, cosmopolitan society. After years of advocacy from club owners, DJs, and music fans, the law was finally reformed in 2015. Restrictions on dancing were removed, though clubs still must meet other regulations regarding noise, operating hours, and lighting. The Japanese dancing law demonstrates how legislation created for one purpose can persist long after its original context has disappeared. A law meant to address post-war social problems continued to govern behavior decades later, creating a disconnect between legal reality and social practice that was only resolved when the gap became too obvious to ignore. Number 12 in Kentucky, it is illegal to carry ice cream in your back pocket. This law, which appears on the books in several American states including Kentucky, seems baffling until you understand its origins. The prohibition has nothing to do with concerns about melting desserts or stained trousers. It's an anti-horse theft law. In the 19th century, horse thieves developed a clever method for luring horses away from their owners. They would place sweet treats like ice cream or pie in their back pockets. The horse would follow the scent and the thief, creating the appearance that the horse came willingly rather than being stolen. By making it illegal to carry ice cream in your back pocket, lawmakers closed this particular loophole. If you were caught with ice cream in your pocket near someone else's horse, it was evidence of criminal intent. The law made the attempted theft technique itself illegal, allowing for earlier intervention before the theft was completed. It's actually rather clever legal thinking, even if the specifics seem ludicrous today. Of course, horses are no longer common transportation, and ice cream theft via pocket temptation is not a pressing concern in modern Kentucky. Yet, the law remains, a fossil from a time when horses were valuable property and their theft was a serious crime worth elaborate legislative prevention. Nobody is getting arrested for having ice cream in their pocket today. But the law's existence reminds us that legal codes are layered documents, accumulating provisions over decades and centuries, with older strata rarely removed even when they've lost all practical relevance. Each obsolete law is a small window into a different time, preserving the concerns and realities of people long dead. Number 13. In Australia, it is illegal to be in possession of more than 50 kilograms of potatoes. Western Australia takes its potato regulations very seriously, perhaps more seriously than any other jurisdiction on Earth. The Marketing of Potatoes Act grants the Potato Marketing Corporation extraordinary powers, including the authority to stop and search any vehicle suspected of carrying more than 50 kilograms of potatoes that might have been acquired from unlicensed sources. Violators can face substantial fines. The law exists to protect the potato industry cartel that the state government sanctioned. The Potato Marketing Corporation has a monopoly on potato sales in Western Australia. Anyone wanting to sell potatoes commercially must go through them. The 50-kilogram limit is designed to prevent people from growing their own potatoes and selling them privately, undercutting the official monopoly. It's protectionism taken to an almost surreal extreme. This means that in Western Australia, possessing a large quantity of potatoes without proper documentation is a more serious offense than it has any right to be. The law has been challenged multiple times as anti-competitive and absurd, and some reforms have been implemented over the years. But versions of the regulation persist. The potato monopoly remains controversial, with free market advocates arguing it artificially inflates prices and stifles competition, while supporters claim it ensures stable prices and quality control. Whatever the merits of the underlying economic debate, the image of police stopping vehicles to inspect potato quantities will forever remain one of the stranger examples of government market intervention. Number 14. In Japan, you must have a license to be a fugu chef. Fugu, the Japanese pufferfish, contains tetrodotoxin, a poison so potent that a single fish has enough to kill 30 adults. There is no antidote. If the fish is improperly prepared, if even a tiny amount of the toxic organs contaminates the edible flesh, the result is paralysis and death. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, fugu is considered a delicacy in Japan. The combination of danger and culinary skill required makes it a highly prized dish. Japanese law requires anyone preparing fugu to undergo rigorous training and pass extremely difficult examinations before receiving a license. The training can take years. The exam includes both written and practical components, with chefs required to demonstrate they can safely remove all toxic parts while preserving the edible portions. The pass rate is often below 50%. This isn't a formality. It's a genuinely difficult certification that requires real mastery. The law exists because people have died from improperly prepared fugu. The deaths were preventable through proper training and technique. By making licensure mandatory and the standards high, Japan has dramatically reduced fugu-related fatalities while preserving an important culinary tradition. It's an example of sensible regulation addressing a genuine public health risk. Unlike many laws on this list, the fugu chef license requirement makes perfect sense. It's not bizarre because it's unreasonable, but because the underlying situation is so unusual. Very few foods are dangerous enough to kill you if prepared slightly wrong, yet still consumed as delicacies. The law reflects the uniquely Japanese approach to managing that contradiction through rigorous professional standards. Number 15. In Scotland, if someone knocks on your door and requires the use of your toilet, you must let them enter. Scottish law allegedly includes a provision requiring homeowners to allow anyone who knocks and requests to use the facilities to enter and do so. The law is often cited as an example of Scottish hospitality enshrined in legal code. The reality is somewhat more complicated. The law's existence in its commonly understood form is debated, with some legal experts claiming it's more myth than reality, while others argue versions of it do exist within property and public accommodation statutes. What seems clear is that historically, Scottish culture placed high value on hospitality and assistance to travelers. In rural areas where facilities were scarce, refusing someone in genuine need would have been considered not just rude, but a failure of basic human decency. Various local bylaws and customary practices developed around this expectation. Whether these ever congealed into a nationwide legal requirement is less certain. But the fact that people believe this law exists, that it's widely cited and discussed, reveals something important about Scottish cultural values. The law, real or imagined, reflects an idealized version of Scottish character, generous, hospitable, willing to help strangers even at personal inconvenience. It's the kind of law people want to exist, even if the legal reality is messier than the legend. And that desire itself is worth examining. We create myths around laws just as we create myths around historical events, shaping the stories to reflect the values we wish to embody. Number 16. In Alabama, it is illegal to wear a fake mustache in church that causes laughter. Alabama code includes a prohibition on wearing a fake mustache or other facial appliance to church if it causes laughter. The law is rarely enforced today, but its existence has been verified in the state's legal archives. The provision is believed to date back to times when disrupting religious services was taken very seriously. when church attendance was not just encouraged, but in many communities effectively mandatory. The specific focus on fake mustaches is what makes the law memorable. Why mustaches? Why not all forms of comic costume or behavior? The specificity suggests that at some point, fake mustache-related church disruption was enough of a problem that legislators felt compelled to address it directly. Perhaps traveling entertainers wore outrageous facial pieces as part of their acts. Perhaps there was a trend of young people mocking church services with costume mustaches. The exact historical context is lost, but something happened to inspire this law. The requirement that the mustache cause laughter is interesting from a legal standpoint. Not all fake mustaches would be illegal, only those that produce merriment. This means a convincing fake mustache worn to cover a skin condition or missing facial hair would presumably be acceptable, but a obviously fake comedy mustache designed to elicit laughs would cross into illegality. Enforcement would require proving both that the mustache was fake and that it caused laughter, presumably through witness testimony. The whole thing is gloriously absurd, a perfect example of legislation that made sense in a specific historical moment but has become pure comedy with the passage of time. Number 17. In Germany, running out of fuel. On the Autobahn is illegal. Germany's famous Autobahns, the high-speed highways with no general speed limit in many sections, are engineering marvels designed for efficiency and flow. German law considers running out of fuel on the Autobahn a punishable offense. The reasoning is that running out of fuel is entirely preventable through basic planning and attention. By running out, you create a hazard for yourself and other drivers, potentially causing accidents and always causing disruption to traffic flow. The German approach treats running out of fuel not as unfortunate bad luck, but as negligent failure to properly maintain your vehicle and plan your journey. It's illegal to stop on the Autobahn except in emergencies. Running out of fuel is not considered an emergency because it's preventable. Therefore, stopping because you ran out of fuel is illegal. The logic is airtight, even if it seems harsh to anyone who has ever experienced that sinking feeling when the fuel gauge hits empty. Enforcement is genuine. If police come across a stopped vehicle that has run out of fuel, the driver can be fined. The fine isn't enormous, typically under 100 euros, but it's enough to emphasize the point. More importantly, running out of fuel doesn't just earn you a fine, it can also be noted on your driving record as evidence of negligence, potentially affecting insurance rates or legal outcomes if you're involved in an accident. The law reflects the broader German driving culture, which takes road rules very seriously and expects a high standard of driver responsibility. On roads where people regularly drive well over 200 kilometers per hour, anything that creates unpredictable hazards is treated with zero tolerance. Number 18. In Milan, you are required to smile at all times in public. A Milanese law dating back to the Austro-Hungarian Empire supposedly requires citizens to smile at all times while in public, with exceptions granted only for funerals and hospital visits. The law is almost certainly not enforced, and even its current legal status is questionable. Some claim it was repealed, others that it simply fell into disuse and was never formally removed from the books. But the law's fame has outlived its practical relevance. The smile law is often presented as evidence of government overreach into personal expression and emotion. Who is the state to demand that people appear happy? What business does government have legislating facial expressions? The criticisms write themselves, but understanding the law requires understanding its historical context. The provision supposedly dates from a time when public morale was considered essential to social order, when visible unhappiness could be treated as a form of dissent or indication of political unreliability. Austro-Hungarian authorities in occupied Milan may have imposed the smile requirement as a way of suppressing visible discontent with foreign rule. If everyone is smiling, there's no visible opposition, no public display of resistance. The law becomes a tool of oppression, dressed in the language of civic cheer. Whether this interpretation is accurate or merely romantic speculation is difficult to determine, but it fits the historical moment and explains why such a seemingly absurd law might have been created. Today, the Smile Law is remembered mostly as a curiosity, a favorite of lists like this one. But beneath the absurdity lies a darker possible history of using law to control not just behavior, but the appearance of emotion itself. Number 19. In Louisiana, alligator theft is a felony. Louisiana takes its alligators seriously. The state is home to millions of alligators, and alligator farming is a significant industry. Alligator hides, meat, and other products generate substantial revenue. Given this economic importance, Louisiana law treats alligator theft as a serious crime. Stealing alligators, their eggs, or their hides is classified as a felony, with penalties including substantial fines and prison time. The severity of the punishment reflects the value of the animals. A single adult alligator can be worth thousands of dollars to a farmer. A clutch of eggs represents future breeding stock and income. Alligator poaching isn't just theft of an animal, it's theft of a valuable agricultural commodity. The law treats it accordingly, placing it in the same category as stealing cattle or other livestock. But there's something inherently amusing about the specificity of the law. Not generic animal theft or wildlife poaching, but specifically alligator theft as its own crime with its own sentencing guidelines. It speaks to Louisiana's unique ecology and economy. In how many other places would alligator theft be common enough to warrant specific legislation? The law is both perfectly reasonable within its context and deeply strange to anyone outside that context. It's a reminder that what counts as normal and necessary in one place can seem exotic and bizarre in another. Louisiana's alligator theft laws make perfect sense if you're a Louisiana alligator farmer. To everyone else, they're a fascinating quirk. Number 20. In Iceland, there are no surnames. In the traditional sense, Icelandic naming law doesn't just regulate what you can name your children, it fundamentally structures how names work in Icelandic society. Iceland uses a patronymic naming system rather than hereditary surnames. Your last name is your father's first name with son or daughter attached. If your father is named John and you're male, your last name is Jonsson. If you're female, it's Jonsdottir. Your children won't share your last name. They'll take their name from you if you're their father, creating a new last name each generation. This system is protected and enforced by law. You cannot simply decide to adopt a different naming convention. The Icelandic Naming Committee must approve all names, ensuring they conform to Icelandic grammatical rules and cultural standards. Foreign names that don't fit Icelandic language structure are often rejected. When foreign-born people become Icelandic citizens, they may be required to take Icelandic names that follow the proper conventions. The patronymic system creates interesting practical complications. Alphabetical lists, like phone books, are organized by first name rather than last name because last names don't function as family names. Icelandic people generally use first names even in formal contexts because last names don't identify family relationships the way they do elsewhere. The system is deeply tied to Icelandic identity and cultural preservation. The naming laws aren't just bureaucratic requirements. They're tools for maintaining linguistic and cultural continuity in a small nation that fears being overwhelmed by outside influences. The laws might seem restrictive to outsiders, but to Icelanders, they're essential protections for a unique cultural heritage. Number 21. In Portugal, urinating in the ocean is illegal. Portuguese law includes provisions against urinating in the ocean, classifying it as water pollution. The law isn't specifically about the ocean, it's part of broader environmental protection statutes, but the practical application means that technically, relieving yourself in the water at a Portuguese beach violates the law. Enforcement is, predictably, nearly non-existent. The ocean is vast, the act is difficult to detect, and the actual environmental impact of individual instances is negligible. But the law exists, and its existence raises interesting questions. At what point does individual action become pollution? Is a single person urinating in billions of liters of seawater actually creating a measurable impact? Or is the law more about principle than practice, establishing that the ocean is not a toilet regardless of practical detectability? The law treats the ocean as something deserving protection and respect, not as a convenient waste disposal system. The provision also highlights how environmental law has evolved. Earlier generations might not have thought twice about such actions. The ocean was infinite, capable of absorbing and diluting anything. Modern environmental consciousness recognizes that no system is truly infinite, that collective small actions can create large impacts. The Portuguese urination law, absurd as it seems, reflects this shift in thinking. It's symbolic legislation, unlikely to be enforced in practice, but important in establishing societal values and norms. The law says, we respect the ocean. We recognize it as valuable beyond its utility, and we don't treat it as a waste receptacle even when the practical harm is minimal. Number 22. In Finland, traffic fines are proportional to income. Finland bases traffic fines on the offender's income, meaning wealthy people pay dramatically more for the same violation than poor people. A speeding ticket that might cost a minimum wage worker €100 could cost a millionaire tens of thousands. The system is called day fines, with the fine calculated based on how many days of income the offense should cost the violator. The reasoning is rooted in equality and deterrence. A fixed fine means nothing to a millionaire, but could be catastrophic for someone living paycheck to paycheck. For fines to function as deterrents, they must hurt proportionally. The day fine system ensures that everyone feels the punishment equally relative to their means. Finland has issued some of the world's highest traffic fines under this system. In 2015, a businessman received a €54,000 speeding ticket. In 2002, a Nokia executive was fined €116,000 for speeding. These amounts shocked international observers, but reflect Finland's commitment to proportional justice. The system raises questions about what equality means in law enforcement. Should everyone pay the same amount for the same offense, or should everyone feel the same level of punishment? Finland has chosen the latter, a radically different approach from most jurisdictions. Number 23. In China, it is illegal to reincarnate without government permission. Chinese law requires Tibetan Buddhist monks to obtain government approval before reincarnating. The law, passed in 2007, requires that all reincarnations of living Buddhas must be approved by the government, with high-level reincarnations requiring approval from Beijing. The law is transparently political. China's relationship with Tibetan Buddhism is fraught, particularly regarding the Dalai Lama. By asserting government control over reincarnation, China attempts to control the selection of future Tibetan Buddhist leaders. The current Dalai Lama has stated he may not reincarnate specifically to prevent China from selecting a puppet successor. From a secular perspective, the law is absurd. It's a government claiming regulatory authority over a religious process many people don't believe is literally real, but it's a way to assert state authority over religion and control a potential source of political opposition. The reincarnation law demonstrates how law can extend state power into domains normally considered outside government reach. Number 24. In Arizona, donkeys cannot sleep in bathtubs. Arizona law prohibits allowing donkeys to sleep in bathtubs. The law's specificity is what makes it remarkable. Not animals in general, not livestock in bathrooms, but specifically donkeys and specifically bathtubs. The origin story behind this law is surprisingly well documented and reveals how bizarre laws often have perfectly reasonable, if highly specific, origins. In the 1920s, a merchant near Kingman, Arizona, kept a pet donkey. The donkey had a habit of sleeping in an old bathtub on the property. When a local dam failed and flooding swept through the area, The bathtub with the donkey still in it was washed miles downstream. The donkey, named Bunk, became stuck in the bathtub in the middle of the flood zone. Rescue efforts were required to free the animal, taking up time and resources during an emergency. The town decided this could not happen again and passed an ordinance specifically prohibiting the practice that had created the problem. The law is so specific because it was created in response to a specific incident. There was no epidemic of donkeys sleeping in bathtubs causing problems. There was one donkey, one bathtub, one flood, and one annoyed town council. But once a law is passed, it tends to stay passed even when the specific circumstances that inspired it will never occur again. The Arizona donkey bathtub law remains on the books, protecting future flood responders from having to rescue bathtub-trapped donkeys, even though the likelihood of the scenario recurring is essentially zero. Number 25, in Finland, taxi drivers must pay royalties if they play music for passengers. Finnish copyright law is strict and comprehensive. It includes a provision that technically requires taxi drivers to pay royalty fees if they play music for passengers. The reasoning is that playing music for passengers constitutes a public performance, which requires licensing and compensation to the copyright holders. The law treats a taxi ride as similar to a restaurant or bar, playing background music for customers. The practical implications are significant. Many Finnish taxis now operate in silence rather than risk copyright violation fines or the hassle and expense of obtaining proper licensing. Some drivers use only specially licensed music services. Others have simply turned off the radio entirely. The result is a notably quiet taxi experience in Finland compared to many other countries where music-filled cab rides are the norm. The law highlights the tension between strict intellectual property protection and practical everyday life. Copyright holders argue they deserve compensation whenever their work is performed, regardless of context. But does playing the radio in a taxi really constitute the kind of commercial public performance that should require licensing? The law says yes, even though many people find that interpretation excessive. It's another example of how laws designed for one context can produce unexpected results when applied to edge cases. The music-playing taxi driver becomes an inadvertent public performer, subject to the same regulations as a concert hall or nightclub. Number 26. In Bangladesh, children age 15 and under can be sent to jail for cheating. On final exams, Bangladesh takes academic integrity seriously, perhaps more seriously than any other nation. The law includes provisions that make cheating on final examinations a criminal offense punishable by jail time for students as young as 15. The law was passed in response to widespread exam cheating that was seen as undermining the entire educational system and devaluing qualifications. The provision is controversial for obvious reasons. Incarcerating teenagers for academic misconduct strikes many observers as wildly disproportionate. But in Bangladesh, exam cheating had reached epidemic proportions, with organized networks helping students cheat, sometimes with assistance from corrupted school officials. The government viewed the problem as serious enough to warrant criminal sanctions. The law is meant to deter not just individual students, but the entire infrastructure of organized cheating. Enforcement has been selective and controversial. Students have indeed been arrested and jailed for cheating, creating images that shocked international observers. Critics argue the law criminalizes behavior that should be handled through academic discipline, not the criminal justice system. Supporters counter that only criminal penalties were severe enough to address what had become systemic corruption of the educational process. The law remains in place, a stark example of how different societies draw different lines about what behavior warrants criminal punishment and at what age individuals should face the full weight of legal consequences. Number 27. In China, you must be intelligent. To go to college, Chinese law includes restrictions on university admission for people with certain intellectual disabilities or learning disorders. The provision is part of broader regulations governing higher education admissions and is intended to ensure that students admitted to universities are capable of completing the academic work. But the phrasing and implementation have drawn criticism for being discriminatory and based on outdated understandings of intelligence and capability. The law reflects a utilitarian approach to education policy. Universities have limited spaces, and the government wants to ensure those spaces go to students who will succeed and eventually contribute to the economy and society. From this perspective, excluding students unlikely to benefit from university education makes a certain cold logic. But critics point out that the law assumes intelligence is fixed and measurable, that certain conditions preclude academic success, and that the purpose of education is purely economic rather than being about human development and dignity. The regulation has been revised over the years, with some conditions removed from the exclusion list. But the fundamental approach remains, treating certain cognitive differences as disqualifying factors for higher education. It's a law that reveals deep questions about what education is for, who deserves access to it, and how society should balance individual rights against collective resource allocation. Number 28. In Russia, driving a dirty car is illegal. Russian law includes provisions that allow police to fine drivers whose vehicles are excessively dirty. The law doesn't define a specific standard of cleanliness, leaving interpretation to the discretion of individual officers. In practice, enforcement focuses on situations where dirt obscures license plates or lights, creating safety hazards or making vehicle identification difficult. But the vagueness of the law has led to accusations of abuse, with some drivers claiming they were fined not because their vehicle was genuinely unsafe, but because officers wanted to extract bribes. The dirty car law becomes a tool for harassment when standards are subjective and enforcement is inconsistent. A vehicle that's acceptably clean in one officer's judgment might be ticketable according to another. The law presumably originated from legitimate concerns about visibility and vehicle maintenance. A car caked in mud with obscured lights is genuinely dangerous in poor weather conditions. But the distance between that reasonable concern and a law that allows police to fine any car they deem insufficiently clean is significant. It's an example of how enforcement discretion can transform sensible safety regulations into something far more problematic. The Russian dirty car law exists in that uncomfortable space between reasonable vehicle maintenance standards and arbitrary enforcement power. Number 29. In Utah, birds have the right of way. On highways, Utah law grants birds the right of way on all highways, making it technically illegal for drivers to hit birds. The law is part of Utah's broader wildlife protection statutes and recognizes that migratory birds use Utah's landscape as critical habitat and travel routes. By giving birds legal right of way, the state establishes that drivers have a responsibility to avoid wildlife, not just for the sake of avoiding vehicle damage, but as a matter of legal obligation to the animals themselves. Of course, enforcing this law presents obvious difficulties. Birds are small, fast, and unpredictable in their movements. A driver going highway speeds has minimal reaction time if a bird suddenly crosses their path. The law doesn't appear to be seriously enforced in terms of prosecuting drivers for accidental bird collisions. Instead, it functions more as a statement of values and priorities. Utah is saying that its wildlife, including its birds, matter enough to have legal protection even in contexts where practical enforcement is nearly impossible. The law becomes relevant in more extreme cases. If someone were deliberately swerving to hit birds or driving recklessly in areas known for bird concentrations during migration seasons, the right-of-way law could potentially be used as part of an animal cruelty prosecution. It provides legal framework for saying that humans don't have absolute priority in all circumstances, that other species have claims that deserve recognition even when inconvenient or impractical for humans to accommodate. Number 30. In Belarus, clapping in public can be considered illegal. Protest. Belarusian law gives authorities broad discretion in determining what constitutes illegal protest activity. This has been interpreted to include activities as innocuous as clapping in public. During periods of political tension, protesters developed creative methods of showing dissent while trying to avoid arrest. One such method was synchronized public clapping, gathering in public spaces and simply clapping together without signs, chants, or explicit political messages. Authorities responded by declaring that such clapping constituted illegal assembly and protest. People were arrested for clapping. The absurdity was intentional on both sides. Protesters chose clapping precisely because it seemed impossible to criminalize such ordinary behavior. Authorities criminalized it anyway, demonstrating that under authoritarian systems, any behavior can be made illegal if it's interpreted as dissent. The clapping arrests became internationally known symbols of Belarus's crackdown on dissent. Images of police arresting people whose only action was clapping captured the surreal nature of authoritarian control. The law doesn't explicitly mention clapping, but gives authorities such broad power to define illegal assembly and protest that anything can potentially qualify. It's a reminder that in some systems, the specifics of law matter less than the political will to enforce or interpret law in ways that serve government interests. A clapping ban exists not as formal statute, but as applied practice, which in practical terms amounts to the same thing for anyone arrested. Number 31. In Norway, keeping chickens is subject to strict noise regulations. Norwegian law regulates not just industrial farming but personal chicken keeping in residential areas. The regulations are detailed and specific, covering everything from co-op construction to noise management. The noise regulations are particularly interesting. Roosters, which crow frequently and loudly, especially at dawn, are often prohibited entirely in residential areas or subject to strict time restrictions on when crowing is permitted. The law reflects the Norwegian emphasis on maintaining quiet, peaceful residential environments where neighbors don't disturb each other. In a country where homes are often close together and communities value tranquility, a rooster's crow at 5 in the morning represents a serious disruption. The regulations prioritize community peace over individual freedom to keep whatever animals one wishes. For people wanting to keep chickens for eggs or as pets, the regulations mean choosing only hens, which are generally quieter, or ensuring roosters are housed in soundproofed structures. Some municipalities require permits for chicken keeping, with conditions attached about numbers, housing, and noise control. What might seem like a simple backyard activity in some countries becomes a carefully regulated affair in Norway. The chicken regulations exemplify the broader Norwegian approach to governance, where collective welfare and environmental harmony often take precedence over individual convenience, and where even small-scale agricultural activities are subject to detailed oversight. Number 32. In Israel, bringing bears to the beach is forbidden. Israeli law specifically prohibits bringing bears to beaches. The law's existence suggests that at some point, someone thought bringing a bear to the beach was a good idea, and authorities disagreed strongly enough to make it explicitly illegal. The exact circumstances that prompted this specific prohibition are unclear, but the law remains on the books. The bear beach ban is part of broader animal control and public safety regulations. Beaches are crowded spaces where dangerous animals pose significant risks, but the specificity of mentioning bears rather than simply prohibiting dangerous wild animals suggests a particular incident or concern. Perhaps traveling shows or entertainers used trained bears, and someone decided a beach performance would draw crowds. Perhaps exotic pet owners wanted to take their unusual companions swimming. Whatever the origin, the law now exists as a specific enforceable prohibition. You cannot bring your bear to Israeli beaches. The law doesn't appear to ban other large or dangerous animals by name, making the bear-specific language all the more curious. It's possible that bears were specifically addressed because they were the animal most commonly requested or attempted, while other dangerous animals were covered by general wildlife regulations. The Israeli Bear Beach ban joins the pantheon of hyper-specific laws that make perfect sense in context, but appear gloriously absurd when encountered without explanation. Number 33. In Poland, Winnie the Pooh was banned from a playground. In 2014, a Polish town council rejected a proposal to use Winnie the Pooh as the mascot for a children's playground. The rejection wasn't exactly a law, but the official reasons given by council members achieved legal infamy. Council members argued that Winnie the Pooh was an inappropriate mascot because the character was improperly dressed, wearing only a shirt and no pants, which they suggested was of dubious morality. The incident sparked international attention and considerable mockery. Winnie the Pooh, one of the most beloved children's characters worldwide, being rejected for indecency in Poland, seemed to capture something absurd about bureaucratic reasoning and cultural conservatism. The council's decision revealed how different cultural standards can lead to wildly different interpretations of the same content. What most of the world sees as an innocent cartoon bear becomes, through a particular lens, an inappropriately attired figure unsuitable for children. The controversy highlighted tensions in Poland between traditionalist and modernist values, between those who see Western pop culture as harmless entertainment and those who view it with suspicion. While not technically a law making Winnie the Pooh illegal, the official government rejection of the character for moral reasons had similar effect in that specific locality. The bear remained banned from that particular playground, a small but telling example of how cultural battles play out in unexpected venues. The Winnie the Pooh controversy became shorthand for discussing cultural conservatism and the sometimes bizarre places it manifests. Number 34. In New Zealand, it is illegal to fly with a rooster. New Zealand aviation regulations prohibit passengers from bringing roosters on commercial flights. The prohibition is part of broader rules about animals in airplane cabins, but the specific mention of roosters stands out. Airlines generally allow small pets in carriers, typically cats and small dogs. But roosters, even if small enough to fit in an approved carrier, are specifically excluded. The reasoning presumably relates to noise and behavioral concerns. Roosters crow often and loudly and wouldn't respect the quiet expected in an airplane cabin. Unlike dogs or cats that can be trained to remain calm and quiet during flights, roosters follow instinct. A crowing rooster at 30,000 feet would disturb every passenger in the cabin. The specific ban suggests that enough people tried to bring roosters on planes that authorities felt the need to explicitly forbid it. The law raises amusing questions about edge cases. What about hens, which are much quieter than roosters? The regulations typically allow birds under certain conditions, but the rooster ban is absolute. It's another example of how laws often develop in response to specific problems or attempts that legislators and regulators couldn't have anticipated in advance. Someone tried to fly with a rooster, it went poorly. Now there's a rule. The New Zealand rooster flight ban is both entirely reasonable and hilariously specific, capturing the essence of regulatory responses to human behavior that seems obvious in hindsight, but apparently wasn't obvious enough to prevent initially. Number 35, in Sweden, it is illegal to paint your house. Without a government permit, Swedish regulations require homeowners to obtain permits before painting their houses, at least in certain areas, and for certain types of changes. The law is particularly strict in historically significant areas or where buildings are culturally protected. The regulations aren't about controlling color preference for aesthetic reasons, though that's sometimes a factor. They're primarily about preservation and ensuring changes to buildings don't damage historical or architectural value. The permit process requires submitting plans showing proposed colors and methods. Authorities review the plans to ensure compatibility with the building's historical character and the surrounding area's aesthetic coherence. In some cases, only certain colors are approved. In others, Modern paint types that might damage old building materials are prohibited in favor of traditional formulations. The regulations can be quite detailed, covering not just what color, but what type of paint and application method. For Swedes, this level of regulation is generally accepted as part of maintaining the country's architectural heritage. For outsiders, particularly from countries with much looser property regulations, the idea that you need government permission to paint your own house seems like extraordinary overreach. The Swedish approach prioritizes collective aesthetic and historical values over individual property rights. Your house might be yours, but it exists in a community and potentially as part of cultural heritage, giving others legitimate interest in what you do with it. The painting permit law exemplifies this philosophy, treating buildings as more than just private property. Number 36. In Malaysia, it is illegal to jump from buildings. Malaysian law prohibits jumping from buildings, with this prohibition explicitly including people attempting to take their own lives. The law criminalized attempts at self-harm, making it punishable by up to a year in prison or a fine. The provision was part of the country's legal code for decades, reflecting British colonial-era laws that treated such attempts as criminal acts. The law created a troubling situation where people in mental health crises could face prosecution. Someone who survived an attempt to end their life could wake up in a hospital only to face criminal charges. Mental health advocates argued for years that this approach was not only cruel, but counterproductive, treating a health crisis as a crime and adding legal punishment to someone already in profound psychological pain. In 2023, Malaysia moved to decriminalize such attempts, recognizing that criminal sanctions weren't appropriate responses to mental health emergencies. But for decades, the law stood, a remnant of older attitudes that treated such acts as moral failings or criminal choices rather than symptoms of treatable mental health conditions. The Malaysian law was an example of how legal frameworks can lag far behind medical and psychological understanding, and how changing those frameworks requires concerted advocacy and cultural shift. The criminalization of self-harm attempts existed in many countries' legal codes, inherited from British law and only gradually reformed as understanding of mental health evolved. Number 37. In Iowa, one-armed piano players must perform for free. Iowa law supposedly contains or contained a provision stating that one-armed piano players must perform for free. The law's current status is debated, with some claiming it was repealed, while others argue it simply fell into disuse. The origin of such a specific prohibition is lost to history, but the specificity suggests a particular incident or individual prompted its creation. The law might have been a strange attempt at disability accommodation, assuming that one-armed pianists had limited career prospects and shouldn't be allowed to profit from music, or it might have been targeting a specific person, a legal vendetta disguised as general legislation. Or perhaps it was never seriously enforced at all, passing as a joke or statement that somehow made it into the books and was never formally removed. Whatever its origin and whatever its current status, the one-armed piano player law represents a category of legislation that seems designed to target hyper-specific circumstances or individuals. Laws are supposed to be general in application, but sometimes they become so specific that they can only apply to one person or situation. The Iowa law, if it truly existed as stated, would be a perfect example. How many one-armed piano players could there have been in Iowa at any given time? The law's target audience might have been a single individual, with the general phrasing a fig leaf for what was essentially personalized legislation. Number 38. In New Zealand, it is illegal to fly in a hot air balloon over a town. While carrying a politician, New Zealand supposedly has a law prohibiting hot air balloon flights over towns while carrying politicians. The law is dubious and likely apocryphal, but its specificity demands imagination of what circumstances would create such legislation. Why politicians specifically? Why hot air balloons rather than other aircraft? Why over towns rather than rural areas? If the law exists, it might relate to security concerns or perhaps to preventing political campaigning via balloon, or it could stem from a specific incident where a politician in a hot air balloon caused some problem over a town, prompting reactive legislation. More likely, it's a garbled interpretation of broader aviation regulations that someone misread or deliberately misrepresented for entertainment. The politician balloon law demonstrates how easily false laws spread once they achieve the right combination of specificity and absurdity. The image of politicians banned from hot air balloons over towns is memorable enough to repeat and specific enough to sound plausible, even without any actual legal basis. Number 39. In Turkey, it is illegal to insult Turkishness. Turkish law includes provisions protecting national honor and identity, with insults to Turkishness being criminally prosecutable. Article 301 of the Turkish Penal Code criminalizes insulting the Turkish nation, the Turkish state, or Turkish government institutions. The law has been controversial domestically and internationally, with critics arguing it's used to suppress free speech and prosecute journalists, writers, and activists who criticize government policies or historical actions. The vagueness of what constitutes an insult to Turkishness gives prosecutors broad discretion. Criticism of government actions, discussion of controversial historical events, or even satire can potentially be prosecuted under the law. Journalists have been imprisoned, authors prosecuted, and intellectuals harassed using this provision. The law treats national identity as something that can be criminally insulted, making criticism of the nation itself a form of illegal speech. The law reflects a particular nationalist philosophy that places national honor above individual free expression. From this perspective, there are things that shouldn't be said, truths that shouldn't be discussed, criticisms that cross a line from legitimate discourse into actionable insult. The international community, particularly human rights organizations and press freedom advocates, have repeatedly called for the law's repeal or substantial reform. But it remains, enforced selectively but seriously, a tool that can be deployed against speech the government finds threatening or offensive. The Turkish law on insulting Turkishness is less bizarre than deeply troubling, an example of how laws can encode authoritarian principles while maintaining the formal appearance of legitimate governance. Number 40. In Argentina, radio stations must play tango music. Argentine law requires radio stations to dedicate a portion of their programming to tango music. The regulation is part of broader cultural protection laws designed to preserve and promote Argentine national heritage. Tango is deeply embedded in Argentine identity, particularly in Buenos Aires, where the dance and music form originated. The law ensures that despite globalization and the dominance of international pop music, tango maintains presence in the cultural landscape. The requirement specifies minimum percentages of airtime that must be devoted to tango and other forms of Argentine folk music. Stations must demonstrate compliance with these requirements to maintain their broadcasting licenses. The regulations are actively enforced, with the government monitoring stations and penalizing those that fail to meet the quotas. For many stations, particularly those targeting younger audiences who might prefer contemporary international music, the tango requirement represents an inconvenience and a limitation on programming freedom. But supporters argue the law is essential cultural preservation. Without such requirements, market forces might push Argentine traditional music out of mainstream media entirely, relegating it to specialty venues and aging audiences. The law uses government power to ensure that Argentine cultural heritage remains accessible and present in daily life. It's cultural nationalism expressed through broadcasting regulation, using law to shape the soundscape of the nation. The Argentine tango law reveals how countries struggling to maintain distinct cultural identities in a globalizing world sometimes turn to legal mandates, using state power to preserve what market forces alone might not sustain. Number 41. In Japan, being overweight is illegal for people over 40. In 2008, Japan implemented the Metabo Law, requiring people between 40 and 75 years old to have their waistlines measured annually. The law establishes maximum waist measurements, 33.5 inches for men and 35.4 inches for women. Those exceeding these limits are required to attend counseling and support programs to lose weight. Companies and local governments can face penalties if their employees or residents don't meet the targets. The law was implemented to combat rising obesity rates and the associated healthcare costs in Japan's aging society. From a public health perspective, the logic is straightforward. Obesity contributes to various serious health conditions that are expensive to treat. By mandating weight management, the government aims to reduce future healthcare costs and improve population health. The approach treats individual body size as a matter of legitimate public concern and government regulation. Critics argue the law is invasive, potentially discriminatory, and based on simplistic understandings of health and body size. Waist measurement alone doesn't account for different body types, muscle mass, or overall health indicators beyond weight. The law stigmatizes people above the arbitrary thresholds while potentially missing health issues in people below them. But the law remains in effect, making Japan one of the few countries to directly legislate body size for its adult population. The Metabo Law represents an extreme form of public health intervention, where the state takes direct responsibility for citizens' physical dimensions and mandates corrective action for those who don't comply. Number 42. In Guatemala, it is illegal to insult someone via a phone call. Guatemalan law prohibits insulting people over the telephone. The law treats phone insults as a prosecutable offense, with penalties including fines and potentially jail time. The provision extends traditional harassment laws into telephone communications, creating criminal liability for verbal abuse delivered remotely. What makes the law notable is its specificity to telephones. Face-to-face insults might be handled differently, and the law predates modern digital communication, creating questions about whether it applies to mobile phones, internet calling, or only traditional landlines. The law reflects an era when telephone communication was relatively new and lawmakers were establishing rules for appropriate use. The phone insult law demonstrates how new technologies require legal adaptation. When communication methods change, questions arise about how existing laws apply and whether new specific provisions are needed. Guatemala chose specific telephone insult prohibitions, treating this communication medium as deserving particular legal attention. Whether this approach makes sense compared to medium-neutral harassment laws is debatable, but it shows how technology shapes legal development. Number 43. In Saudi Arabia, there is no minimum age for marriage. Saudi Arabian law has historically not specified a minimum age for marriage, though recent reforms have begun to address this gap. The absence of a minimum age meant that marriages involving very young children were technically legal, though reforms and judicial guidelines have increasingly restricted the practice. The law reflects traditional interpretations of Islamic jurisprudence that allowed marriages to be contracted at puberty or even before, with consummation delayed until puberty. The legal framework creates situations where children can be married, though international pressure and internal reform movements have pushed for change. In 2019, Saudi Arabia began implementing regulations requiring judicial approval for marriages involving anyone under 18, effectively creating a minimum age with exceptions rather than an absolute prohibition. But the framework remains contested, with traditionalists arguing that Islamic law doesn't support arbitrary age restrictions and reformers arguing that modern understanding of child development and rights requires clear minimum ages. The Saudi approach to marriage age law reveals tensions between traditional religious law and contemporary human rights norms. It's an area where cultural specificity runs headlong into universal rights claims, where what counts as appropriate governance and social organization is fundamentally contested. The law, or lack thereof, has made Saudi Arabia a target of international criticism while also serving as a focal point for internal debates about modernization, tradition, and the proper relationship between religious principles and state law. 44. In Ireland, it was illegal to buy contraceptives. Until 1980, Irish law banned the sale and import of contraceptives for decades, with the prohibition rooted in Catholic moral teaching and enforced by the state. The ban wasn't lifted until 1979, and even then, contraceptives could only be obtained with a prescription and only by married people. It wasn't until 1985 that contraceptives became available to people over 18 regardless of marital status, and not until 1993 that condoms could be sold freely without prescription. The contraception ban shaped Irish society profoundly, affecting family planning, reproductive health, and personal autonomy. People who wanted contraceptives had to either break the law, travel to Northern Ireland or Britain where they were legal, or go without. The law treated contraception as sufficiently immoral to justify criminal prohibition, reflecting the Catholic Church's enormous influence over Irish law and society during much of the 20th century. The gradual lifting of the ban marked Ireland's slow movement away from church-dominated governance toward more secular law. Each reform was controversial, fought over in Parliament and public debate, with arguments about national identity, morality, and personal freedom. The contraception laws and their eventual repeal represent broader transformations in Irish society, from a largely homogeneous Catholic nation where church teaching was enshrined in law to a more pluralistic society where religious doctrine and civil law occupy separate spheres. The fact that contraception remained illegal in a European democracy into the 1980s serves as a reminder of how recently many individual freedoms we take for granted were actually secured. Number 45. In Virginia, it is illegal to hunt animals. On Sundays, Virginia law prohibits hunting on Sundays with certain specific exceptions. The law dates back to religious blue laws that mandated Sunday as a day of rest and worship. Hunting was considered work or recreation that shouldn't occur on the Sabbath. The prohibition applied regardless of the hunter's personal religious beliefs, making it a state enforcement of what was essentially a religious practice. Over the years, the law has been modified with exceptions carved out for specific game and specific circumstances, but the basic Sunday hunting ban remains in place for many types of hunting. The law is controversial, with hunters arguing it's an outdated religious restriction that shouldn't apply in a secular society and that limits there to enjoy public lands. Supporters argue it provides wildlife with a guaranteed day of reduced pressure each week and maintains a traditional day of quiet in rural areas. The Virginia Sunday hunting law is part of a broader category of blue laws that still exist in various forms across America. These laws once prohibited all sorts of commercial and recreational activities on Sundays, from shopping to drinking to working. Most have been repealed as archaic religious impositions incompatible with modern pluralistic society, but some persist, the Virginia hunting ban among them, fossils of the time when religious observance was enforced by state law and when Sunday was protected by legislation as a day apart from ordinary activities. Number 46. In England, it is illegal to be drunk in a pub. The Licensing Act of 1872 makes it illegal to be drunk on licensed premises, which includes pubs. The law creates a peculiar situation where the primary purpose of pubs is to serve alcohol, yet being drunk in one is technically criminal. The law is rarely enforced, and most pub goers have no idea they're technically breaking the law if they become intoxicated. The provision exists primarily to give authorities legal grounds to remove or arrest people who become so drunk they're causing problems. It's not meant to criminalize ordinary drinking, but to provide legal tools for dealing with extreme intoxication that threatens public order or safety. But the literal reading of the law would criminalize most people on a Friday night in any British town. The gap between the law as written and the law as enforced is enormous. This gap raises questions about what law is when it's universally unenforced, except in extreme circumstances. Is it still law if nobody follows it and authorities only invoke it selectively? The drunken pub provision functions more as a tool of enforcement discretion than as a genuine behavioral standard. It gives police and publicans power to act when they deem necessary while remaining dormant the rest of the time. It's law as potential rather than law as consistent rule, which fits oddly with rule of law, principles that suggest laws should be clear, consistently applied, and not selectively enforced based on circumstances and discretion. Number 47. In Samoa, forgetting your wife's birthday is illegal. Samoan law supposedly includes or included a provision making it illegal for husbands to forget their wives' birthdays. The law's actual existence and current status are difficult to verify, with the story possibly being more legend than legal reality, but the law appears frequently in compilations of strange laws, suggesting it has at least some basis in Samoan legal history or custom. If the law exists or existed as stated, it would represent an extraordinary intrusion of legal authority into private relationship dynamics. How would enforcement work? Would wives report their husbands to police for forgotten birthdays? What would constitute forgetting versus remembering but not celebrating? The practical problems multiply quickly. More likely, if such a provision ever existed, it was part of customary law or family regulations rather than criminal code, with social rather than legal enforcement. But the legend of the law, even if the reality is dubious, tells us something interesting. It speaks to cultural values about marriage, remembrance, and the role of law in governing intimate relationships. The idea that a society might legally mandate spousal birthday remembrance suggests a culture that takes family obligations very seriously and is willing to bring legal force to bear on personal relationships. Whether Samoan law actually does this is less important than what people believing it does. This reveals about expectations of what law could or should do in regulating human relationships. Number 48. In Minnesota, it is illegal to cross state lines. With a duck on your head, Minnesota law supposedly prohibits crossing state lines with a duck on your head. Like many laws on lists like this, verification is difficult, and the law's actual text and current status are murky, but the specificity of the prohibition, if it exists, demands explanation. Why duck specifically? Why on your head? Why crossing state lines in particular? The most likely explanation, if the law is real, involves smuggling or tax evasion. In earlier eras, agricultural products including poultry were subject to various regulations and taxes. Someone attempting to avoid these might have tried transporting ducks in unconventional ways. Carrying a duck on your head while crossing state lines might have been a specific technique or might have been one example in broader anti-smuggling legislation. Or the law might have been created in response to a specific bizarre incident, someone doing exactly this for reasons now lost to history, with authorities deciding it shouldn't happen again. Or it might be entirely apocryphal, a joke that got repeated enough to seem like fact. But real or not, the duckhead law has achieved immortality through these lists, becoming a permanent part of how people think about strange laws, even if it never actually governed anyone's behavior. It's become true in the way myths become true, not as fact, but as story that captures something about human absurdity and legislative overreach. Number 49. In Spain, parents cannot name their children after popular brands. Spanish law prohibits parents from naming their children after commercial brands or products. The restriction is part of broader naming regulations designed to protect children from names that could cause ridicule or harm their dignity. Names like IKEA, Nike, or Nutella would be rejected by civil registries. The law reflects a paternalistic approach where the state intervenes in parental naming choices to protect children's interests. The reasoning is that children bear no responsibility for their names but must live with them. A name that parents find clever or amusing might subject a child to lifelong mockery. By prohibiting obviously problematic names, including brand names, the law attempts to prevent parents from imposing burdens on children through unfortunate naming choices. Spain is not alone in regulating names. Many countries maintain lists of prohibited names or have officials who review proposed names for appropriateness. The balance between parental freedom and child protection produces different approaches across cultures, but Spain's brand name prohibition represents a clear line. Commercial products are not appropriate namesakes for human beings. Number 50, in Hong Kong, a husband can end his marriage if his wife commits adultery, but not vice versa. Until recently, Hong Kong law allowed men to divorce wives for adultery, but didn't grant women the same right regarding husbands' infidelity. The law dated to colonial-era British provisions that treated adultery differently based on gender. A wife's adultery was automatic grounds for divorce, while a husband's adultery had to be combined with other factors like cruelty or desertion. The inequality reflected historical attitudes about marriage, fidelity, and gender roles. Women were expected to remain faithful absolutely, while men's infidelity was treated as less serious. The law encoded double standards into the legal framework of marriage, treating identical behavior differently based solely on the spouse's gender. Hong Kong eventually reformed these provisions to establish gender equality in divorce law, but the fact that such blatantly discriminatory laws persisted into the 21st century demonstrates how slowly legal systems adapt to changing social values and how long historical inequalities can remain embedded in law even after the societies that created them have moved on. Number 51, in Cambodia, water guns are banned. Cambodia prohibits water guns. The ban isn't about children's toys, but about public order. Water guns were used during celebrations in ways that created chaos, soaking strangers, causing traffic problems, leading to confrontations. The government banned them entirely rather than trying to regulate their use. The water gun ban creates an unusual situation where a toy found in most countries is contraband. Tourists bringing water pistols for their children could technically face confiscation or fines. The law treats water guns not as harmless playthings, but as instruments of public disorder requiring prohibition. Cambodia's approach reflects a governance philosophy that favors clear prohibitions over managed permissions. Rather than allow water guns with restrictions on use, the law eliminates them entirely. It's regulatory simplicity taken to an extreme. If something causes problems, ban it completely rather than deal with the complexities of regulated use. Number 52, in Nicaragua, dueling is legal if both parties are blood donors. Nicaraguan law supposedly contains a provision making dueling legal under certain conditions, including that both participants must be registered blood donors. The law is difficult to verify and may be apocryphal or misinterpreted. If real, it would represent an extraordinary combination of archaic practice and modern public health policy. The supposed reasoning would be that blood donors have demonstrated civic responsibility and bodily autonomy, perhaps justifying their right to engage in consensual dangerous activities, or the provision might be entirely satirical, legislative humor that got recorded as actual law. Without access to Nicaraguan legal codes, verification is impossible. Real or not, the dueling blood donor law demonstrates how legends develop around legal systems. The combination of seemingly incompatible elements, honor dueling and blood donation, creates a memorable story that spreads regardless of factual basis. It's the kind of law that should exist in a Gabriel Garcia Marquez novel, even if it doesn't exist in Nicaragua's statute books. Number 53, in South Korea, men are required to serve in the military. South Korean law mandates military service for men between ages 18 and 28. The requirement stems from the ongoing technical state of war with North Korea and the need to maintain large military forces. Men must serve approximately 18 to 21 months, depending on their branch of service. Failure to serve results in criminal prosecution and imprisonment. The law creates significant life disruptions. Men must interrupt education or careers for military service. The mandatory nature means personal circumstances, beliefs, or plans are irrelevant. Service is required regardless. Exemptions exist for serious health conditions or certain family situations, but conscientious objection is not recognized and objectors face imprisonment. South Korea's mandatory service law reflects the security situation on the Korean peninsula. The large standing military requires constant replenishment through conscription, but the law also creates controversy, questions about fairness, about alternative service options, about wealthy or connected individuals avoiding service, and about whether mandatory military service is compatible with individual freedom. The debate continues, but the law remains, sending generation after generation of young men into military service. Number 54. In Mexico, it is illegal to curse. The President Mexican law prohibits cursing or insulting the president. The provision is part of broader protections for public officials and national symbols. Violating the law can result in fines or imprisonment. The law treats presidential criticism not as protected speech, but as potentially criminal depending on its form and content. The curse prohibition creates obvious tensions with free expression. Determining what constitutes illegal cursing versus permissible criticism requires judgment calls that give authorities discretion. The law can be used to silence critics by prosecuting not the substance of their criticism, but the manner in which it's expressed. Mexico has debated repealing or reforming these protections, with critics arguing they're incompatible with democratic governance and press freedom. Supporters claim they maintain respect for institutions and prevent discourse from descending into mere insult. The tension between protecting dignity and protecting speech remains unresolved, with the law still on the books, even as enforcement has become less common. Number 55. In the Philippines, divorce is illegal. The Philippines is one of only 2 countries in the world where divorce remains illegal for the general population. Marriage is considered permanent and indissoluble, except through annulment. Annulment is expensive, time-consuming, and requires proving the marriage was invalid from the beginning, rather than simply acknowledging it has broken down. The prohibition reflects the Catholic Church's influence in Filipino society and politics. The Church teaches that marriage is a sacrament that cannot be dissolved. This religious doctrine has been enshrined in civil law, binding even non-Catholics to Catholic marriage doctrine. The practical result is that many Filipinos remain legally married to estranged spouses, unable to remarry or move on legally. The wealthy can afford expensive annulments, while the poor remain trapped in failed marriages. Proposals to legalize divorce face fierce opposition from religious groups, creating a situation where religious doctrine overrides secular governance and where legal reform on personal matters becomes nearly impossible. Number 56. In Iran, women cannot watch men's sporting events. Iranian law prohibits women from attending men's sporting events in stadiums. The restriction is enforced through religious police and stadium security. Women who attempt to attend matches risk arrest and prosecution. The ban applies even to women who want to watch their family members compete. The prohibition stems from religious interpretations about gender segregation and women's presence in public spaces. Authorities claim the ban protects women from the rowdy atmosphere of sporting events and maintains moral order. Critics argue it's simple gender discrimination that denies women basic freedoms. Iranian women have protested the ban through various means, including disguising themselves as men to attend matches. International pressure has led to occasional exceptions, but the general prohibition remains. The law demonstrates how religious doctrine can restrict fundamental freedoms and how difficult it becomes to challenge such restrictions when they're framed as religious requirements rather than policy choices. Number 57, in UAE, insulting someone via text message can result in jail time united. Arab Emirates law treats electronic insults seriously. Sending offensive or insulting messages via text, email, or social media can result in criminal prosecution, substantial fines, and imprisonment. The law applies to both residents and visitors, and authorities actively enforce it. What constitutes an insult is broadly interpreted. Criticism of officials, offensive language, or even emoji usage can be prosecuted. The law has been used against tourists who complained about poor service, expatriates who criticized their employers, and residents who argued with neighbors. The penalties can be severe, months or years of imprisonment for what in other countries would be civil disputes or free speech. The UAE electronic insult law demonstrates how digital communication has created new domains for legal regulation. Traditional insult laws applied to spoken or written words. Electronic communication adds complexity, permanent records, wide dissemination, unclear jurisdictional boundaries. The UAE has responded with broadly written laws and strict enforcement, treating electronic insults as serious crimes requiring harsh punishment. Number 58. In Egypt, it is illegal to disturb peace. By singing, Egyptian law prohibits disturbing the peace through singing, among other activities. The provision allows authorities to prosecute people for singing in public if it's deemed disruptive. Street musicians, protesters singing slogans, or even people singing loudly in their homes could technically violate the law. The prohibition reflects laws designed to maintain public order and quiet, but it creates obvious problems. Singing is a normal human activity, a form of expression and joy. Criminalizing it based on subjective assessments of disruption gives authorities broad discretion to silence speech and expression they find objectionable. The singing law has been used politically to prosecute protesters and dissidents. By framing their singing as public disturbance rather than protected expression, authorities can criminalize protest while claiming to enforce neutral public order laws. It's a common pattern. Vague laws about maintaining order become tools for suppressing speech and controlling public spaces. Number 59. In Israel, it is illegal to bring pork products into the country for personal consumption. Israeli law restricts bringing pork products into the country. The prohibition stems from kashrut, Jewish dietary laws that forbid pork consumption. While Israel is a secular state, religious dietary restrictions have been encoded into civil law, affecting even non-Jewish citizens and visitors. The pork ban isn't absolute. Certain communities can import and sell pork products under specific conditions, but bringing pork across borders for personal use can result in confiscation and fines. The law creates an unusual situation where the state enforces religious dietary restrictions through customs and border control. Israel's pork prohibition demonstrates tension between secular governance and religious tradition. In a state founded partly as a Jewish homeland, how much should religious law influence civil law? The pork ban represents a compromise, not complete prohibition, but significant restriction, religious tradition given civil enforcement while allowing exceptions. It's an ongoing negotiation between religious identity and secular pluralism. Number 60. In Vietnam, license plates containing unlucky numbers cost less. Vietnamese law allows the government to price vehicle license plates based on the numbers they contain. Plates with lucky numbers according to Vietnamese numerology, particularly those containing 8s, cost significantly more than plates with unlucky numbers containing 4s or combinations considered inauspicious. The pricing structure turns cultural superstition into government revenue. People willing to pay premium prices for lucky numbers subsidize the licensing system. The practice is transparent. Lucky numbers cost more, unlucky numbers cost less. Everyone knows the system and can choose accordingly. Vietnam's license plate pricing demonstrates how governments can monetize cultural beliefs. The state doesn't endorse numerology, but profits from those who believe in it. It's a clever revenue strategy that extracts money from willingness to pay for perceived luck while giving cost-conscious buyers cheaper options through unlucky number plates. Number 61. In Bhutan, tobacco sales are banned. Bhutan prohibits the sale of all tobacco products. The ban, implemented in 2004, makes Bhutan one of the few countries to completely prohibit tobacco commerce. Possession for personal use is legal if purchased abroad and duty is paid, but domestic sales are forbidden. Violators face steep fines. The tobacco ban reflects Bhutan's unique approach to governance, prioritizing public health and cultural values over commercial freedom. As a Buddhist nation, Bhutan views tobacco as harmful to both physical health and spiritual development. The ban aligns with broader policies focused on gross national happiness rather than purely economic measures. Enforcement creates challenges. Black markets develop. Smuggling from India and China continues. Tourists must declare tobacco products and pay duties. But Bhutan maintains the ban, accepting enforcement difficulties as worthwhile trade-offs for the public health benefits. Its governance guided by values other than economic freedom or consumer choice. Number 62. In Croatia, you need a license to sell coffee. Croatian law requires special licensing to sell coffee in retail establishments. The provision regulates who can sell what products, with coffee placed in a category requiring specific permissions. The law presumably protects quality or ensures proper training in coffee preparation, though the specifics are unclear. The coffee license requirement creates bureaucratic complexity. Opening a cafe requires not just general business licenses, but coffee-specific permissions. The extra layer of regulation increases barriers to entry and gives authorities additional oversight of food service businesses. Croatia's coffee licensing represents a type of regulation common in European systems, specialized permissions for specialized products. Whether coffee sales genuinely require unique regulation beyond general food safety laws is debatable, but the law persists, requiring anyone selling coffee to obtain proper authorization before serving that first cup. 63. In Morocco, it is illegal to import binoculars without permission. Moroccan customs law heavily restricts importing binoculars. The restriction stems from security concerns about surveillance equipment. Binoculars could theoretically be used for espionage or to survey military installations, so their import is tightly controlled. Travelers bringing binoculars for innocent purposes like birdwatching can face confiscation and questioning. The binocular restriction demonstrates how security concerns create unusual prohibitions. An item that's completely mundane in most countries becomes contraband in Morocco. The law treats all binoculars as potential security threats, requiring special permissions that most casual users would never obtain. The practical effect is that tourists interested in wildlife observation or hikers wanting to survey terrain must either leave their binoculars home or risk customs problems. It's an example of how broadly written security laws can create barriers to innocent activities, sacrificing convenience and tourism appeal for perceived security benefits. Number 64. In Turkmenistan, opera singing was banned. Turkmenistan under President Sapar Murat Niyazov banned opera, along with ballet and circus performances. The prohibition was part of broader cultural restrictions aimed at promoting Turkmen identity over foreign cultural forms. Opera was deemed foreign and unnecessary, not aligned with Turkmen traditions. The opera ban exemplifies authoritarian control over culture. Rather than allow citizens to choose which art forms to enjoy, the state decided which cultural expressions were acceptable. Opera, with its European origins and elite associations, was targeted as foreign corruption rather than universal art form. The ban was lifted after Niyazov's death, but it stands as an example of how dictatorships extend control beyond politics into culture and art. When the state decides what music citizens can hear, what performances they can attend, and what art forms are acceptable, freedom becomes narrowly circumscribed. The opera ban was absurd but also chilling, a reminder that some governments claim authority over even the aesthetic choices of their citizens. Number 65. In Seychelles, it is illegal to have more than 15 kilograms of potatoes. Seychelles limits the amount of potatoes individuals can possess. The law apparently aims to protect local agriculture by preventing people from hoarding imported potatoes that could undermine domestic production. The 15-kilogram limit allows personal consumption while preventing commercial-scale importation by individuals. The potato limit creates an unusual situation where a basic food staple is rationed, not due to shortage, but to protect local markets. It's protectionism at the individual consumer level, assuming that without such restrictions, people would import potatoes in quantities that would harm Seychelles' agricultural sector. Whether 15 kilograms of potatoes poses a genuine threat to Seychelles' agriculture is debatable, but the law persists, making it technically illegal for families to stock up on potatoes beyond a fairly modest limit. It's economic protectionism taken to granular levels, regulating not just trade, but personal food storage. Number 66. In Congo, it is illegal to wear a red beret. In the Republic of Congo, wearing a red beret can be considered a political statement and may result in arrest. The red beret is associated with opposition movements and has become a symbol of dissent. The government treats wearing one not as fashion choice, but as political expression that can be criminalized. The beret prohibition demonstrates how authoritarian governments control not just speech, but symbols. A piece of clothing becomes illegal not for any inherent quality, but for what it represents. By banning the symbol, authorities attempt to suppress the ideas it stands for. The law creates absurd situations where travelers or residents wearing red berets for entirely apolitical reasons, fashion, sun protection, cultural traditions from other countries, can face police scrutiny. It's governance through symbol suppression, treating objects as threats when they become associated with opposition movements. Number 67. In North Korea, only government-approved haircuts are legal. North Korean law restricts hairstyles to a limited number of government-approved options. Men can choose from approximately 15 styles, women from about 18. The approved styles are displayed in barbershops and salons. Hairstyles associated with Western culture or individual expression are forbidden. The haircut restriction extends state control into the most personal aspects of appearance. The government decides not just what citizens can say or do, but how they can look. Hair becomes a domain of state regulation rather than personal choice. Enforcement is handled through social pressure and periodic crackdowns. People with unapproved hairstyles face public criticism, mandatory haircuts, and potential difficulties at work or school. The haircut law is part of a broader system of control that regulates clothing, accessories, and all aspects of personal presentation, treating individual expression as threatening to state authority. Number 68. In Switzerland, it is illegal to slam car doors. Swiss noise regulations supposedly prohibit slamming car doors after 10 p.m. in residential areas. The prohibition is part of broader Sunday and nighttime quiet rules that govern Swiss life. Any loud noise that disturbs neighbors' peace can violate these regulations, and car door slamming is specifically mentioned in some local ordinances. The car door law reflects Swiss cultural values about communal consideration and noise discipline. It treats loud door closing not as an unavoidable byproduct of using vehicles, but as a controllable behavior that considerate people should modify to avoid disturbing others. The law assumes people can and should close car doors quietly at night. That convenience doesn't excuse noise that impacts neighbors. Enforcement is inconsistent but possible. Neighbors can complain and fines can be issued. The mere existence of the regulation, even if rarely enforced, establishes expectations about behavior. Its governance through social pressure backed by legal sanction, law that functions more as community standard than as routinely enforced prohibition. Number 69. In Greece, it was illegal to wear high heels at ancient sites. Greece implemented regulations restricting certain footwear at archaeological sites. High heels can damage ancient stone floors and monuments, creating wear patterns and even breaking fragile surfaces. The regulations ban heels above a certain height at sites like the Acropolis, treating footwear choice as an archaeological preservation issue. The high heel ban created controversy. Some viewed it as reasonable protection of irreplaceable heritage. Others saw it as arbitrary restriction on personal choice and fashion. The rule particularly affected women, who disproportionately wear high heels, raising questions about whether archaeological protection was being pursued in unnecessarily gendered ways. Greece modified the rules over time, with some sites maintaining strict bans, while others simply encourage appropriate footwear. The high heel controversy demonstrates the tension between preserving the past and accommodating modern visitors, between protecting fragile heritage and allowing people to experience it on their own terms. Number 70. In Indiana, it is illegal to catch fish with your bare hands. Indiana law prohibits catching fish by hand, a practice called noodling. The prohibition exists because hand fishing can be dangerous. People reach into underwater holes where large catfish hide, risking bites, entanglement, and drowning. The law protects both humans from dangerous practices and fish from unsporting harvesting methods. Hand fishing is legal in some states and banned in others, creating a patchwork of regulations. States that allow it typically regulate when, where, and what species can be caught by hand. States that prohibit it cite concerns about overfishing, disturbance of fish spawning beds, and human safety. Indiana's noodling ban represents government protecting people from themselves and wildlife from unregulated harvesting. It's paternalistic, telling adults they can't engage in a dangerous practice even if they accept the risks. But it's also practical wildlife management, recognizing that traditional fishing regulations don't adequately address hand fishing's unique impacts. Number 71. In Denmark, you must check that no one is under your car before starting it. Danish law requires drivers to check under vehicles before starting them, ostensibly to ensure no children or animals are sheltering there. The law dates to an era when street children and homeless people sometimes sought warmth under vehicles. While those conditions are rare in modern Denmark, the law persists as a safety measure. The requirement is rarely enforced as a standalone violation, but could be relevant in accident investigations. If someone is injured by a vehicle starting and the driver didn't check underneath, the law provides a basis for negligence claims. It functions more as civil liability framework than criminal prohibition. The undercar check law represents legislation addressing historical problems that no longer exist in the same form. Modern Denmark doesn't have significant numbers of people sleeping under cars, but the law remains adapted to new purposes, child safety, animal protection, that justify maintaining a provision created for different reasons. Number 72. In Florida, unmarried women cannot parachute on Sundays. Florida supposedly has a law prohibiting unmarried women from parachuting on Sundays. The law is widely cited but unverifiable in actual Florida statutes. If it ever existed, it would combine religious blue laws restricting Sunday activities with antiquated attitudes about women's behavior, creating a provision that's both discriminatory and absurdly specific. The supposed law treats parachuting not as a universal activity to be regulated generally, but as something requiring special restrictions for unmarried women on specific days. Why unmarried women rather than all women? Why parachuting rather than other activities? Why Sundays? The specificity suggests either a garbled legend or legislation responding to a very particular historical incident. The Florida parachute law exemplifies how alleged laws take on lives of their own regardless of factual basis. The combination of gender discrimination, religious restriction, and bizarre specificity makes it memorable and repeatable. Whether true or not, it tells a story about the kind of legislation that could have existed even if it didn't. Number 73. In Oklahoma, it is illegal to take a bite. Out of another person's hamburger, Oklahoma supposedly has a law prohibiting taking bites from other people's hamburgers without permission. The law, if real, would criminalize an everyday social transgression, eating someone else's food without asking. The specificity to hamburgers suggests either the law is broader and hamburgers are just an example, or there was a specific hamburger-related incident that prompted targeted legislation. Most likely, if any such provision exists, it's part of general theft or harassment laws, rather than hamburger-specific legislation. But the idea of hamburger bite theft being serious enough for criminal law is delightfully absurd. It elevates a minor social rudeness to the level of state concern, imagining authorities investigating and prosecuting unauthorized hamburger consumption. The Oklahoma hamburger law, real or not, represents the kind of hyper-specific provision that results either from legislative overreach or from entertaining misinterpretation of broader statutes. It's become part of the strange law canon, repeated and believed by many despite dubious provenance. Number 74. In Norway, there is a law about beer and alcohol content. Norwegian law strictly regulates alcohol sales based on content. Beer above a certain alcohol percentage can only be sold through government monopoly stores, not in regular grocery stores. The regulations create situations where nearly identical products are sold in completely different venues based on fractional differences in alcohol content. The system reflects Norwegian attitudes about alcohol as a substance requiring government control and management. Rather than trust market forces and individual choice, Norway treats stronger alcohol as something that needs state mediation. The government monopoly on wine and spirits is designed to reduce consumption and generate revenue for public purposes. The Norwegian alcohol laws aren't absurd in themselves, but create absurd situations. A beer at 4.7% alcohol is freely available in grocery stores. The same beer at 4.8% requires a trip to the state liquor store. The line is arbitrary but enforced, creating inconvenience and confusion while presumably achieving policy goals around alcohol consumption. Number 75. In Massachusetts, it is illegal to deface. A milk carton Massachusetts law prohibits defacing milk cartons, a provision that seems oddly specific. The law likely relates to the practice of putting missing children's photos on milk cartons. Defacing those images could be considered interfering with the search for missing children. Or the law might protect the container's informational content, nutrition labels, expiration dates that serve public health purposes. More broadly, defacing commercial packaging can constitute tampering or vandalism, but singling out milk cartons specifically suggests particular concerns. Milk cartons are distributed widely, visible in many homes, and carry information considered important enough to warrant legal protection. The milk carton defacing law, whether narrowly or broadly interpreted, demonstrates how legislation protects not just physical property, but information and images. In an era when milk cartons carried photos of missing children, defacing them had social implications beyond mere vandalism. The law elevated milk cartons from simple containers to protected vessels of important public information. Number 76. In Utah, it is illegal not to drink milk. Utah supposedly has or had a law requiring milk consumption. The law is almost certainly false or badly misinterpreted. Utah does have laws about dairy promotion and milk labeling, and as a dairy-producing state, has historically supported the dairy industry through various means. But actually requiring citizens to drink milk would be an extraordinary government overreach. If any such provision existed, it was probably a symbolic resolution supporting dairy farmers or encouraging milk consumption rather than a criminal mandate. Legislative bodies often pass proclamations and declarations that aren't enforceable laws, but express support for industries or causes. A drink milk resolution could be misremembered or misrepresented as a requirement. The Utah milk law demonstrates how complicated legal systems produce legends. A dairy support resolution becomes Utah requires drinking milk. The story spreads because it's simple and memorable, even though it misrepresents what actually happened. The truth, government supporting local industry, is less interesting than the legend of mandated milk consumption. Number 77. In Vatican City, you cannot get a driving license. Vatican City doesn't issue driving licenses. The city-state is small enough that driving isn't necessary for most purposes, and those who do drive typically use licenses issued by Italy. But Vatican City's lack of driver licensing means it's one of the few places on Earth where you legally can't learn to drive. The absence of driving licenses reflects Vatican City's unique status as a religious rather than conventional state. Its primary function is serving as the headquarters of the Catholic Church, not providing all the services of a normal country. Residents who need driver's licenses obtain them elsewhere. Vatican City's driver license situation creates odd legal questions about driving privileges and recognition. If you're a Vatican citizen residing full-time in Vatican City, where do you legally learn to drive? The practical answer involves Italy's cooperation, but it highlights how many states can lack basic governmental functions that larger nations take for granted. Number 78. In Malta, cursing in public can result in arrest. Maltese law prohibits using obscene or insulting language in public places. The provision allows police to arrest and fine people for cursing where others can hear. What constitutes obscene language is broadly interpreted, giving authorities significant discretion. The cursing prohibition reflects Malta's Catholic heritage and cultural values about public decorum. The law treats public space as requiring a certain level of civility, with profanity considered a violation of community standards worthy of legal sanction. Enforcement is inconsistent but possible. Tourists who curse in frustration, locals who use colorful language during arguments, or anyone whose vocabulary includes profanity in public spaces technically violates the law. It's a provision that criminalizes everyday speech patterns, elevating social rudeness to legal offense and giving police power to intervene in verbal expressions they find objectionable. Number 79. In Bangladesh, students can be jailed for cheating on exams. Bangladeshi law makes cheating on major exams a criminal offense, punishable by imprisonment. The provision applies particularly to standardized exams used for university admission and professional licensing. Students caught cheating face not just academic consequences, but potential jail time. The harsh penalty reflects how seriously Bangladesh treats educational integrity and the high stakes of exam performance in a competitive society. When exam results determine life opportunities, cheating becomes more than academic dishonesty. It's treated as a form of fraud with serious social consequences. The law creates an unusual situation where teenage students can be sent to jail for cheating behaviors that in other countries might result in failing grades or suspension. It's criminalization of academic misconduct, treating cheating not as a school discipline issue, but as a crime against society worthy of imprisonment. Number 80. In Lebanon, it was recently illegal to marry someone from Israel. Lebanese law prohibited marriages between Lebanese citizens and Israelis. The ban reflected the ongoing state of hostility between the two countries. Any Lebanese citizen who married an Israeli faced legal consequences, and the marriage would not be recognized in Lebanon. The marriage prohibition extended beyond simple non-recognition to actual criminalization of the relationship. It treated marriage to an Israeli as a form of collaboration with an enemy state, punishable under laws about contact with hostile countries. Lebanon has begun relaxing some restrictions, but the marriage ban demonstrates how geopolitical conflicts create laws that control the most personal decisions. Who you can love and marry becomes a matter of national security and political loyalty rather than personal choice. Its state power extended into intimate relationships, political enmity translated into family law. Number 81. In Yemen, women need permission to leave the house. Yemeni law historically required women to obtain male guardian permission for many activities, including leaving the house, traveling, or working. The restrictions stem from interpretations of Islamic law combined with tribal customs that treat women as requiring male oversight. The exit permission requirement makes women legally dependent regardless of age, education, or capability. A woman cannot simply decide to visit a friend, go shopping, or take a walk without male authorization. Her mobility is controlled by fathers, husbands, brothers, or other male relatives who have legal authority over her movements. The law exemplifies extreme patriarchal control enshrined in legislation. Women are treated as perpetual minors, requiring male supervision for basic freedoms. Reform efforts face resistance from conservative, religious, and tribal authorities, creating situations where legal progress toward equality is blocked by those who benefit from maintaining control. Number 82. In Cuba, it is illegal to buy or sell your home. Until recent reforms, Cuban law prohibited buying and selling homes. Property transactions were illegal and homes could only be swapped or inherited. The prohibition stemmed from communist economic policies that treated private property markets as incompatible with socialism. The housing market prohibition created a complex barter system where people traded homes of different values, supplementing exchanges with hidden cash payments that were technically illegal. The system was inefficient, corruption-prone, and made it difficult for people to move or downsize as their needs changed. Cuba has begun allowing limited property sales, but the decades-long prohibition demonstrates how communist ideology created laws that controlled basic economic activities. When you can't buy or sell your home, you're tethered to your current living situation, regardless of changing circumstances. It's economic control that impacts fundamental life decisions about where and how to live. Number 83. In Eritrea, national service is mandatory and can last indefinitely. Eritrean law requires all citizens to perform national service. Originally intended to last 18 months, national service has been extended indefinitely for many conscripts, with people serving for years or even decades. Refusal results in imprisonment, and families of draft evaders face collective punishment. The indefinite national service creates a system resembling forced labor. Conscripts receive minimal pay, work in military or government projects, and cannot leave without permission. The program has been criticized by human rights organizations as modern slavery. Eritrea's national service law demonstrates how military conscription can be abused. What begins as defense necessity becomes mechanism for controlling population and providing cheap labor for government projects. The indefinite nature means young people lose years or decades of their lives to service that has no clear end date, creating enormous pressure to flee the country despite harsh penalties for desertion. Number 84. In Swaziland, women cannot wear pants. In public, Swazi law historically prohibited women from wearing pants in public. The restriction was enforced through traditional authorities and social pressure. Women who wore pants faced harassment, forced stripping by police, and public shaming. The pants prohibition reflects traditional dress codes based on gender. Pants were considered male clothing, and women wearing them were treated as violating proper gender presentation. The law enforced not just clothing choice, but rigid gender roles and hierarchy. Swaziland has moved toward greater tolerance, but enforcement was serious enough that women would change clothes when crossing borders or faced real fear of police action for wearing pants. It's a reminder that clothing restrictions can be tools of gender control, where something as simple as trouser wearing becomes a legal and social transgression. The laws we've explored tonight range from the merely outdated to the actively enforced, from the protective to the oppressive, from the practical to the incomprehensible. They come from every continent, from democracies and dictatorships, from ancient civilizations and modern nations. Each one is a window into a specific moment, a particular set of concerns, a unique culture's attempt to order human behavior. What these laws collectively reveal is that governance is messy, that legislation accumulates faster than it's removed, that yesterday's urgent concern becomes tomorrow's punchline. They show us that law isn't always rational, that what makes sense in one context appears absurd in another, that the distance between the reasonable and the ridiculous is often just time and perspective. They remind us that we're governed by documents written by people with all the short-sightedness, overreaction, and occasional wisdom that entails. Some of these laws protect genuine interests: archaeological preservation, wildlife management, public safety. Others enforce cultural values: Sunday quiet, respect for monarchy, communal consideration. Still others seem to serve no purpose beyond their own existence, fossils of forgotten circumstances perpetuated through bureaucratic inertia. The strangest aspect of all these laws isn't their content, but their persistence. Removing laws requires effort. Someone must notice the outdated provision, draft repeal legislation, shepherd it through the legislative process. In most cases, nobody bothers. The law sits on the books, technically enforceable, practically forgotten, until someone compiling a list of strange laws resurrects it for our entertainment. We laugh at laws prohibiting donkeys in bathtubs or regulating Brussels sprout throwing. But these laws, absurd as they are, reflect something fundamentally human. We create rules in response to problems, real or imagined. We try to impose order on chaos. We hope that writing something down will change behavior. Sometimes it works. Sometimes we end up with donkeys legally banned from bathtubs while actual problems go unaddressed. The laws also reveal how different cultures prioritize different values. Some societies use law to enforce courtesy and consideration, quiet times, proper footwear, polite door closing. Others focus on protecting symbols and institutions from insult or disrespect. Still others try to manage risks people take, whether hand fishing or parachuting or balloon riding. Each approach reflects assumptions about what law is for, what problems deserve legal solutions, and how far government should intrude into private choices. As you drift off now, wherever you are, whatever time it is, consider the invisible legal framework that surrounds you. You're probably violating some obscure law right now, some forgotten provision that once seemed important enough to codify, but now only exists in dusty statute books and internet lists. You're simultaneously a law-abiding citizen and a perpetual lawbreaker, depending on which laws we choose to remember and enforce. Every place you might ever visit has its own collection of strange laws, its own buried legislative fossils, its own rules that once made sense to someone. We live in a world bound by laws both sensible and bizarre, and somewhere tonight, someone is probably breaking a law they don't even know exists. Someone is stepping on currency. Someone is slamming a car door after 10 p.m. Someone is catching fish with their bare hands in Indiana, blissfully unaware that their actions technically violate the legal order. Sleep well, knowing that you're probably an outlaw somewhere.